Good evening, I'm Emma Jane Van. This is Television Tonga News. In the headlines, Their Majesties to officiate at a special ceremony to mark the Chinese New Year in Tonga. A 3-year-old girl dies after a house partially collapses on her. The National Emergency Management Office uses more than 250,000 ba'anga from the government's emergency fund for the relief efforts underway in Ha'apai. And Nuku'alofa welcomes more than 1,000 tourists from 2 cruise ships from Germany and the United States. These and more stories, including news from the Pacific, sports, world and the weather information later on in this bulletin. Let's take a look at the news in detail. Their Majesties King Dabo VI and Queen Anaspa will officiate as the guest of honour at a special ceremony to mark the Chinese New Year in Tonga. This is held at the International Dateline Hotel tonight. Members of the royal family are also attending the ceremony, along with the Honourable Acting Prime Minister Sami Vaipulu. Fatai Whainga'a tells you more.
Speeches during the reception to mark the Chinese New Year in Tonga is delivered by the Chinese Ambassador to Tonga, His Excellency Huang Hua-Kwang, and the Honourable Acting Prime Minister Sami Vaipulu. Tonga and China maintains its diplomatic ties of more than 10 years now, with China playing a crucial role in Tonga's development through its various aid programs, which have benefited both the government and its people. This includes China's multi-million pa'anga aircraft, the MH-60, which was gifted to Tonga to help ease domestic transportation and meet other needs. Other assistance includes a recent donation of food items by the Chinese community in Tonga for victims of Tropical Cyclone Ian in the Ha'apai group of islands. The Chinese New Year is commemorated annually in Tonga.
A 3-year-old girl died last Thursday after the house she lived in partially collapsed on her. The house is located at the Takamotonga. The Acting Deputy Commander of Police, Salote Tonga, told Television Tonga News this morning that the house was quite old. The deceased family rushed her to Viola Hospital, where a doctor informed them that the girl passed away when the house collapsed on her, causing fatal injuries. The National Emergency Management Office has used more than 250,000 ba'anga allocated from the government's emergency fund for the relief efforts underway in Ha'apai in the aftermath of Tropical Cyclone Ian. Wadring Galistionuku with the details.
The Honourable Acting Prime Minister and Chairman of the National Emergency Management Office, Sami Vaipulu, says the amount used was an allocation from a total amount of government's 5 million ba'anga emergency fund. He adds that most of the expenses were injected into emergency operation to clear uprooted trees and houses which had fallen or collapsed during the cyclone. Other major cost goes to the refueling of the Navy patrol boats, which is used to transport emergency supplies and relief workers to the smaller and remote islands in Ha'apai. The remaining fund will be used to get more food to be distributed throughout the Ha'apai island, which faces a shortage of food and water. Moreover, the Acting Prime Minister says food will be distributed later this week to families affected by the Cyclone Ian. The food items are distributed according to the 2011 Ha'apai census and other reports submitted by health officers in the various districts. Acting Prime Minister stressed that all foreign financial assistance in the Ha'apai Relief Fund to be used wisely and to save some funding for future relief effort if needed. In a few days, Mr. Vaipulu says government will also receive a pledge of 2 million ba'anga from the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Pilot. This will be made via the National Reserve Bank of Tonga. Meanwhile, relief operation underway in the Ha'apai group of islands for the emergency and recovery in the aftermath of the cyclone is named Whanga'iwiha Operation. Reporting for Television Tonga News, I'm Kalisi Tuyonuku.
The Tonga Red Cross is seeking more tents from its overseas partners for displaced families in Ha'apai, although it's distributed more than 100 tents since Tropical Cyclone Ian hit the Ha'apai group of islands. Here's Fatai Whainga'a with that report.
The Secretary General of Tonga Red Cross, Sione Tamwe-Folau, says supplies they've handed out to displaced families in Ha'apai includes tarpaulin, bottles to store water, kerosene lamps, and other items.
We
We are concerned for residents in the smaller islands like Ha'ano, Mo'ungaone, Wiha, and Felemea, as their locations are more scattered. So there is a challenge in transporting supplies to them regularly. I believe Lifuka and Foa are more fortunate as they receive donations weekly, as it's more convenient for the ships to dock at the wharf. The Tonga Red Cross is planning to construct temporary houses for families who have been displaced. Planning is underway to build temporary houses or shelter. We will submit these plans to government and our developing partners overseas. Meanwhile, Billfish Bar and Restaurant has presented us with a monetary assistance of 2,500 pa'anga to help victims of the cyclone in Hawaii. Other items donated to the Tonga Red Cross for distribution in Hawaii include clothes and other items. The Secretary-General of Tonga Red Cross thanked donors and the public for their support and cooperation in this relief effort tribe.
It will take up to 10 years for Hawaii's environment to fully recover from the damage sustained by Tropical Cyclone Ian, which hit the island more than 2 weeks ago. The officer in charge of the Ministry of Land, Survey, Environment, Climate Change and Natural Resources in Hawaii, Malakai Finau, shared this with Television Tonga News this morning. Sinilatu has the details.
The Hawaii group of islands is not just vulnerable to the effects of climate change and sea level rise, but it's also vulnerable to natural hazards. The officer in charge of the Ministry of Land, Survey, Environment, Climate Change and Natural Resources in Hawaii, Malakai Finau, says the environment and vegetation suffered destruction from the cyclone, including trees along the coastal line, which faced the most damage. Trees are one of the main factors which helps safeguard against soil erosion. The environment in Hawaii has suffered up to 75% damage from the cyclone. Most of the vegetation across the coastal area was uprooted by the cyclone. Similar damages were witnessed inland. Work is underway among stakeholders and non-government organizations to replant trees as part of the environment's recovery efforts from the natural disaster. The office in charge of the ministry says they are working closely with regional officers to conduct surveys along their coastal areas. A team from the Pacific Islands Applied Geoscience Commission, or SOPAC, is arriving today to conduct surveys and witness the destruction to the coastal areas, especially soil erosion. After this, we will be looking for donors to fund a foreshore for the Lifuka district. The Ministry of Environment is hopeful that time and nature will be on their side to help in a speedy recovery for the Hawaii group of islands. For Television Tonga News, I'm Sinilatu.
The Tonga National Form 5 certificate examination results were distributed to the various secondary schools yesterday. This follows the Form 6 and 7 exam results, which were distributed earlier. Meanwhile, some schools have started for this new academic year, while many more will begin next week. Television Tonga News has contacted the various education departments of church schools and the Ministry of Education for feedback on the exam results, but no one has made a comment yet. More than 1,000 tourists from a German cruise ship and an American cruise ship visited Nuku'alofa yesterday afternoon. The MS Columbus from Germany docked at the Queen Charlotte Wharf, while the Crystal Symphony docked at Vuna Wharf yesterday morning. Anasiu Falekaono has more on that story.
The general manager of the Dateline Shipping, Fine Tohi, says this is not the first time for two ships to arrive at the same time in the kingdom. He adds that more than 300 passengers were on board the MS Columbus, while the American Crystal Symphony brought more than 800 passengers. That the tours served as an agent for the MS Columbus, while the Rising Sun Tour Agency accompanied passengers from the Crystal Symphony. Mr. Tohi stressed the importance of keeping the environment clean in order to boost Tonga's tourism industry and leave a good impression on tourists for them to keep coming back. The MS Columbus and Crystal Symphony departed Nuku'alofa late afternoon for Suva and Lautoka before travelling to Auckland. For Television Tonga News, I'm Sinilatu.
That's the local news. Pacific is up next.